Good evening to all our participants connected today from across the world. On behalf of Central Zoo Authority and Sri Chamarajendra Zoological Gardens, I extend a warm welcome to all our listener participants who have joined us today from across the globe. This is a sixth in series of the webinars that we have initiated to reach out to the zoo community on topics that are of mutual interest and also you global experts who are well known and respected in this field. Today, through this digital platform, we bring to you some very esteemed speakers to discuss and dwell upon the aspect of enrichment for animal welfare. So at the onset, I would like to welcome Dr. S.P. Yadav, IFS, and additional DG Forest for Project Tiger and Member Secretary, National Tiger Conservation Authority and Central Zoo Authority. Due to his continued support, we have been able to continue with specific topics and experts from across the globe to the zoo community for the last 3 months. And he himself has been instrumental in steering tiger conservation in its range countries and capacity building initiatives to strengthen ex situ and in situ linkages. So over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Sonali, and very good evening to all participants as well as the speakers. This webinar, the topic looks to be very apt, the enrichment of animal welfare. In fact, animal welfare I consider is one of the most important fundamental pillar of captive wildlife management anywhere in the world. About CZA, Central Zoo Authority in India is a statutory body, unlike other countries. This is a regulatory body, and in fact, in India, no zoo can be created or can operate without approval of Central Zoo Authority. This has got legal power to regulate functions of zoo management in the country. Besides regulatory functions, we also provide technical support, funding support, and capacity building support to all our zoos across the country. And in this way, we are moving from a regulatory role to a facilitator role as well. We are also a member of the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And the main function of CZA is to recognize zoo for operations. And when I say zoo, it also includes rescue facilities, rescue centers, and circus also, wherever the animal are exhibited are displayed to the public. We basically oversee working conditions of zoo across the country. We do evaluation, we do monitoring, and ensure that minimum standards of captive animal management in these zoos are maintained. We are also looking into the one plan approach, like from ex situ to in situ connection, as supported by the IUCN. And we are trying to ensure the professional management of wildlife in captivity. Next slide, please. As most of you are aware, we have large number of zoos in the country. There are 152. As you can see in the map, they are spread across all parts of the country. And very large number of people visit our zoo. Around 7 to 8 million people annually visit our zoo, and mostly it is a very good center for awareness and outreach for the children and aged people who cannot visit our national parks, sanctuaries, and tiger reserves. Next, please. If you see, we in captivity we keep the wild animals, and wild animals they enjoy a beautiful habitat in the wild. But when we keep them in captivity, they are highly stressed. For example, restriction on movement of their movement, restriction on the space. If you see a tiger in India tiger is territorial animal, and most of the animals are territorial. So tiger is a territorial animal, and one tiger occupies on an average 20 square kilometer to 200 square kilometer in our country. And if you see the range of tiger in countries like Russia, the Siberian tiger, their range extends from 200 to 1,200 to 1,500 square kilometer. So this kind of territorial animal, when we keep in captivity, then it becomes, they become highly stressed, and it becomes our responsibility to provide them as natural, as close possible environment to them. Similarly, the improper social grouping in animals, that is the limitation in the captivity, barren enclosures. I always say that if you want to keep lion in the captivity, you must create habitat, mini habitat, micro habitat of lion in the captive facility. And similarly, this is true for all wild animals. Then these animals are stressed due to visitors also, and constantly they are interacting. In the wild, they hardly interact with human presence, but here they are exposed to visitors constantly also. This also creates stress. And in captivity, there is a routine kind of days for them, routine for all wild animals. For that, for example, like meals, they are served on particular time, but it doesn't happen in wild. Like if you see the tiger, it hunts when it is hungry, when it needs food, and hunts mostly once in a week or once in a 4 to 6 7 days. So here they are conditioned to the captivity. So it becomes our responsibility to provide them natural conditions, enrichment, so that they can stimulate them for their normal behavior. Next slide, please. So the enrichment philosophy is about environment enrichment, process for improving, enhancing zoo animal, and basically their behavior, because they are kept in captivity, their phenotypic and genetic divergence sometimes that is reflected, and the behavior changes. I have seen when I was DFO Agra, and when I rescued this dancing bears and handed over it to Agra Bear Rescue Facility, and then we saw that their swinging of head, that behavior that continued for years together. So the enrichment philosophy is that provide such kind of enrichment that stimulates the natural behavior in the animal. And again, it's not one-time process. It's a dynamic, and it should keep on changing. It should keep on improving based on the experience with the animals. Next slide, please. So everyone, all the zoo managers know about the objectives of enrichment. The animal welfare is, as I said, it's a fundamental pillar of captive animal management, and this should become the first priority. Animal enclosure, although we have standards, minimum standards, we are ensuring in India, but they should have enough space for animals to show their normal behaviors, and they should not feel insecure. That is one of the most important. Security and reproduction, these two aspects, two needs of wild animals are most important, to which govern their behavior and all. So the objectives are reduce aberrant behaviors, reduce stress-related captivity, display species typical behavior patterns. Like every animal has typical behavior, and we should try to create circumstances or environment where they show their normal behavior. Increase in activity level of animals. In fact, in captivity, there are many animals we do not reproduce. And then the reason behind this is they do not get enough stimulation in captivity, and probably the enrichment is one of the solutions to enhance productivity or reproductive ability of these animals in the captivity. Next slide, please. In fact, CJD has been trying to build capacity of zoo managers in the country. Several publications the CJD has already issued. They come out with several publications, and they are in public domain. But there is no end to it. As I said, it's a dynamic process. There are n number of possibilities of making life of these captive animals happy. So enrichment provides makes life of these animals happy and close to nature. I'm looking forward for both the presentations, which I'm sure they're going to be very exciting. With these words, I welcome again all speakers and as well as the participants, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. And you have set the tone for the webinar today. And as you have said that this is a dynamic process. And let us now hear from our expert speakers and get to know the best practices that are followed across zoos in the world. So now I welcome Ms. Georgina Groves, Executive Director of Wild Welfare, an international agency dedicated to improving captive wild animal welfare. Ms. Georgina has over 20 years of experience working for animal welfare, research, and conservation organizations. She and her team has been working in several projects across zoos, especially on exotic captive animal welfare in Pakistan, Japan, and South America. She is a member of the Zoological Society of London's Animal Welfare Committee and also the Species Survival Network for the Animals in Captivity Working Groups. And she continues to be associated with Bristol University and the Natural History Museum, London. So over to you, Georgina, and look forward to hearing from you about your experiences.
Thank you very much. Can I check that my screen is showing?
Yes, please. Yes, it is.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to CZA delegates. This is very exciting for me to be able to share the work that I do. So today I'm going to talk to you about enrichment and animal welfare, but in particular, focusing on the importance of promoting optimal welfare through three specific areas, which is comfort, choice, and control within the environment. But firstly, I want to briefly consider the various reasons as to why animal welfare needs to be a priority for zoos and aquariums in the 21st century. Firstly, animals in zoos should be afforded the opportunity to thrive, and we have that ethical obligation to consider the welfare of all our animals and provide them with that respectful environment which promotes those conditions of optimal welfare. But secondly, there are also implications for good business practice. Good animal welfare supports biological functioning. So, for example, high standards of welfare improves reproductive success, survivability, and longevity. We also have that social license or responsibility. We, of course, have our moral duties, but zoos are also judged on consequentialism. Essentially, we're judged on our actions rather than what we say, and there is increased scrutiny and changing perceptions about how animals should be kept by the public and also by our sponsors. There's increased research also that shows people want to make ethical choices, and in the current socio-political climate, there's growing pressure for businesses such as zoos to be transparent and active in ethical practice. The humane economy, seeing animals live well, drives visitation. The rationale for visiting zoos and demand from the visitor has changed over time. In the past, it was just about show me as many animals as possible. And today it's about how we care for those animals. And in the future, it's going to be much more about how we connect and how we have an empathetic connection with those animals. So zoos nowadays are here to educate and help consumers, i.e. the public, make better, more conscious choices. But what do we actually mean about welfare? Welfare now is about thriving. It's not just about surviving, and it's about ensuring an animal has a good life. Animal welfare is a concept that has a diversity of definitions and perhaps quite often a lot more misunderstandings. And it's only really been studied properly in the past few decades. And the perceptions of animal welfare are culturally sensitive They're globally variable and subject to change through time. And it has actually been stated that there's no consensus of how to measure the welfare status of an animal objectively. However, ideas about animal welfare have evolved to the point where there's now general agreement amongst all the experts that there's increased emphasis on the affective state or the emotional capacity of an animal for them to have a good life. We must, as animal carers, provide animals with consistent positive experiences and positive affective states. And the ability to have an emotional capacity isn't just limited to those higher charismatic species. Even the humble fish is highly evolved. They've been shown to have fear, excitement, anger, pleasure, and anxiety. Their brain produce compounds that accompany the same emotions in mammals. So we must consider the animal's capacity to experience positive and negative emotions when we're designing their environments and their enrichment. How can we encapsulate affective or emotional states and use them to understand good animal welfare? The 5 domains model, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, is a framework focusing device to help facilitate systematic, structured, and comprehensive and coherent assessment of animal welfare. It's not a definition of animal welfare, but the purpose of each of those 5 domains, nutrition, environment, health, behaviour, and the mental state, is to draw attention to areas that are relevant to both animal welfare assessment and management. And one of the main differences between, say, this model and the 5 freedom model, which is also a very popular animal welfare model, is that the 5 domain model considers the promotion of positive experiences such as pleasure of eating or drinking or rewarding engagement, and not just the mitigation of poor experiences such as thirst or hunger, boredom or frustration. But like us, and this is really important, no animal will solely experience positive experience throughout its entire life, and it will fluctuate on an hour, daily, monthly basis. And therefore, a quality of life is determined by examining the balance between those negative and positive experiences we provide them. Functionally, this means environments should facilitate and promote positive welfare experiences specific to that individual. These environments should elicit positive feelings for these animals, such as contentment and satisfaction and engagement, and mitigate or reduce those negative welfare experiences specific to the individual, such as fear or chronic stress. And I've identified 3 main areas that this can be provided through the care, environment, and enrichment that we provide them. These are the 3 C's, as I call them: comfort, choice, and control. And I want to look at those in a bit more detail and consider them when we're talking about animal enrichment. So comfort, providing comfort encompasses a lot of the aspects of those daily care provisions that we give animals that provide for their basic biological functioning. It's about creating an environment that creates satisfaction with a social and physical environment while providing appropriate health services. Physical, social, and behavioural comfort can result in those positive experiences I'm talking about and positive affective states, and therefore good welfare. So positive social interactions, security provisions, refuge and shelters, appropriate thermoregulation, appropriate food and water to be provided, and of course appropriate safety, both proactive healthcare and protection from injury. What do we mean by choice? Well, traditionally, if you think about it, where zoo animals are housed, or where they spend their time, and often what they do, is controlled and determined by us. However, research has shown that when animals are given choice, they find that all animals have their own individual preferences, and it reduces stress. So for example, when giant pandas were typically kept in an outside enclosure, were given the choice to go into a small room away from the public, they were less agitated and showed a decrease in stress. Polar bears showed positive behavioural changes and less abnormal behaviours when they were given the choice of indoor space. And goats and sheep in a petting zoo were given the option of retreat or refuge space, showed a lower rate of undesirable behaviours when they had no such space. understanding captive animal preferences can be really valuable when we're designing environments and enrichment for them, and providing animals with the ability to make choices within their space will enhance their well-being. So what sort of choices are important? Well, you would first consider what's important to that animal. How have they evolved? What natural environment did they evolve in? What behaviours are a priority to them? And then you consider individual preferences, because individuals within a species will have different preferences. So choices might be about access to space. It might be different substrates that you provide them for comfort. It might be an opportunity for different social options, making friendship groups, choices of mate, choices to retreat away and be on their own. Choices of different foods. Do you provide them with the same food each time, or do you give them a variety of choices? Just want to show you this video, which is a nice example of two bears who were given straw in two separate indoor areas, but they had the choice to be together. And as you'll see by this bear, he moves all his straw and bedding to actually be with the other bear. So he had the choice to be on his own or be with his brother. It was his brother, and he chose to be with his brother. This is a really important point. Having the choice can be more important than using the choice. So pandas, again, using their off-exhibit room, they only used it for 33% of the available time, and the polar bears only used the off-exhibit space for 2% of the available time. In all those zoo-based studies, the animals showed positive responses to being provided with the ability to make a choice, irrespective of whether they exercised that choice. And this has been really important, again, with environment and enrichment design, as it may be that even if the enrichment isn't used, having the choice to use it is enough to recreate positive welfare experiences. How is control different to choice? Choice lets an animal react to its environment, while control allows an animal to proactively change its environment. And I think this is really best exemplified by, again, this video. This is from Zoos Victoria in Australia. And this individual triggered the hose and the water to go off so that it could cool down, but it only went off when the animal moved past the water. So that individual had the choice and control in its environment. It could control whether it wanted to get wet or not, and it could control whether it wanted to cool or not. So all three C's, comfort, choice, and control, are a really good starting point to consider when building an enrichment plan. And we want enrichment to support consistent opportunities for positive, effective states by encouraging natural and normal behaviours in captive animals. Remember, we're trying to ensure animals are thriving in captivity as opposed to being either frustrated, stressed, or both. An animal will be frustrated if the environment doesn't let the animal express its normal behaviours. An animal will be stressed if it is put in an environment where it's very different to the one it evolved in and it cannot cope. However, an animal will thrive if the environment offers choice and control that allows the animal to perform those natural and normal positive behaviours. But how do we know what an animal actually wants? There's a number of different behaviours that animals will carry out. So how do we know which one are strongly motivated? They're strongly motivated to carry out. Well, we can do something called preference testing. Effectively, we can test the willingness of an animal to work for resources. This gate here is a very hard gate to push through, but you'll see that this cow forces its way through because it knows that it has this scratching post the other side. And this is an example of preference or motivational testing. This animal was very motivated to get to this scratching post, so we would therefore know that this is a strong behavioural need for this individual. However, there is a catch to this. The relative strength of preference for an animal can differ according to various things. So what other available options might be available, the time of the day, or other immediate needs at the time. An example of this is from cockroaches. It was in a study, cockroaches preferred to rest in little small groups in darker locations. However, when robot cockroaches were introduced to the group, they started valuing much larger social groups in light conditions. So their preferences where they rested changed depending on the size of the social group. And that's just worth considering when trying to understand what behavioural preferences an animal has. So animal enrichment, we're aiming for thriving. Animal welfare is characterised by that animal environment interaction. And first of all, you must really understand the behavioural biology of that species. Also understand the individual preferences of that animal. And then you design an effective enrichment programme incorporating that above knowledge. There's two sort of forms of enrichment as I see it. There's basic husbandry enrichment, which is essentially provisions of basic physical environmental infrastructure, substrate, resting burrows, branches, heat lamps for warmth, which provides for that comfort element of a good environment. You've then also got the actual physical changing enrichment. So when biological requirements are met, environments then can be enriched by offering greater choice and control, which results to challenge. Challenge and complexity can include things such as an unpredictable regime. It can include a challenge like working for your food, and it can include cognitive and sensory enrichment. And it increases an animal's feeling of control over itself and the environment if it has an appropriate challenge. But appropriate is really important. It needs to be appropriate for that species and that individual. An animal needs to be able to build resilience and coping ability so it can develop an ability to overcome those challenges. So there's a fine line. You can have a challenge which isn't enough, it isn't much of a challenge, and it will result in boredom and understimulation, and the welfare won't be optimal. You can have a challenge which is just right, which stimulates the animal appropriately, and you have welfare, optimal welfare. Or you can have a challenge which is too much, it's too frequent, it's too intense, it's too difficult, and an animal is unable to overcome it, and it can become frustrated and stressed. And that's, again, a really important rule to remember when you're providing enrichment for your animals. There are many forms of enrichment that can be provided for, but just remember that enrichment should be based around the animal's behaviour that satisfies a specific need. These needs are based on the species-evolved behavioural needs and the individual preferences. We don't have time to go through all forms of those different enrichment types, but I do want to consider a few enrichment ideas from a perspective of those 3 C's: comfort, choice, and control. Food enrichment is a very obvious and simple enrichment opportunity. In most animals, food is a very powerful motivator of behaviour. So it's no surprise that the manner and timing of feeding affects the behaviour in captive animals. We have to feed them. So we want to ensure that what we feed them and how we feed them meets their biological function and also provides choice and control. It should be species appropriate and safe. There should be a provision of different food choices, and it should be provided in a manner that allows the animal to choose when and where to eat. And all of these can result in positive experiences. Just through a quick unpublished study in Paignton Zoo in the UK, when scatter feeding was provided for tapir, there was significant increase in closure use and positive activity by the tapir. So this is just a simple change in how the animals were fed, and it resulted in positive welfare experiences. And it's not just the charismatic, as you remember. This is an example of a fish having enrichment. just being fed its food, which was hidden in a Kong. So it just had to do a little bit of work for that food, and it was just a little bit more interesting than sprinkling the food on the top of the water. Fish are rarely given the same compassion or welfare as our warm-blooded vertebrates, but they have that sentient capacity, and it's really important to consider enrichment for all species. When we're talking about food, how we feed them is so important. And again, this is just a quick video, which I believe is an example of how not to feed a species. So these chimpanzees are being publicly fed as an exhibit. And as you'll notice, the chimps are clapping their hands for the food, which is essentially a begging behavior. Now they have what looks like a really fantastic enclosure to use. However, due to the nature of how they're being fed, they're actually showing stereotypical or abnormal behaviors. So while the experience may be positive for those watching as humans, it's not necessarily positive for those chimpanzees. This video, on the other hand, taken at Wildlife Reserves Singapore, is a really nice example of a chimpanzee having to use a tool and its cognitive abilities to get the food. Apologies for the chatting in the background. So that was interesting for that individual, and it reduced boredom, and it was species appropriate. So the most important aspect of feeding enrichment is to consider how would that species source and eat food in the wild. And when thinking about food presentation and food enrichment, there's another interesting concept to take into account about how to present food, and that's contra-freeloading concept. This is where an animal is provided with a choice between making an effort to obtain food when it's eaten from, or by eating it from a freely available source. And quite often animals will choose to work for that food. And this video is quite a nice example. And what you'll hopefully note from this is that there's a carrot on top of that box, which that giraffe could have eaten. So it didn't need to work for that food. Why do they do this? It allows the animal to express species-specific behaviours. And it's a really useful and simple, quite often simple enrichment tool. And so consider what animals would benefit most from contra-free loading in your facility. What animals can least perform their natural foraging behaviours at the moment? Substrate is also one of the easiest forms of enrichment that can be provided, but still is seriously underutilised in zoos. And I want to consider it from the perspective of the resting behaviour of animals. Many facilities still don't fully appreciate how valuable good and appropriate substrate actually can be. Resting behaviours are an essential component of animal welfare, and in a relatively recent study showed that African elephants who spent any amount of time housed on all hard substrate slept a lot less. They didn't lie down. Asian elephants who spent any amount of time housed on all soft substrate slept a lot more during the day. The ability to lie down and rest is incredibly important, and the influence of flooring substrate is important to recumbent rest, and by extension zoo elephant welfare, and by that extension to all zoo animal welfare. And it doesn't need to necessarily involve mess. A lot of the facilities that I work with are worried about the mess that substrates such as sand or soil or bark chips might cause. But actually you can also create really simple beds for animals. Indoor spaces where animals are kept a significant portion of the time are inherently sterile. These simple beds that we help the zoo in Thailand make are really great, not just for resting components, but also for the individual physical health. They're practical, they're movable, they're multifunctional, and they're really also great for geriatric animals that need something lower to get on. Just another study which was done again at Patent Zoo through the EASA office, the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums office. The introduction of bark significantly reduced aggression in the baboon enclosure, also significantly increased play, a positive behavioural experience within this group. And that was just by the introduction of new substrate. Planning enrichment. So importantly, you want to set goals, and these are going to be behaviourally focused. What behaviours do you want to encourage or discourage, and how can you do that? You think about the animal's natural history, you think about the individual preferences. However, perhaps even more importantly than goal setting is about addressing animal motivation. What are our animals motivated to do, and how are we going to give those animals the opportunity to do them? You would then plan a formal process involving all your stakeholders about your enrichment program, and you create a framework and implement it. You'd implement that, you document and observe, and you'd evaluate, did you meet that goal? Are the animals able to be carrying out those motivated behaviours? If not, why not? And how can you readjust it? Evaluation is an incredibly critical point, both from the assurance of ensuring the enrichment program is successful, but also that it's safe. Few things to consider, which is sometimes forgotten when creating an enrichment program: life cycle variations. Animals will need have very different needs varying on their lifespan. Young animals will want different things to old animals, and we have an aging zoo population, and therefore we need to consider their needs and behavioural wants. You also want to consider your animal's breeding requirements. This could be providing them with opportunities to choose a mate or engage in courtship rituals, provide nesting or denning areas and materials. Other things to consider are seasonal variations. What type of seasonal changes your animals would experience in its natural habitat? Varying temperature and lighting in the enclosure can be enriching, or providing access to sprinklers or humidifiers to stimulate rainfall. Also think about the seasonal variation at your own zoo. Can the animals access outdoor enclosures throughout the winter? Or does it get hot enough where you are in the summer to make cooling opportunities necessary, and do you provide them? And again, things to consider, enrichment isn't just for those charismatic species. A study by Bashaw in 2016, they gave 5 types of environmental enrichment to leopard geckos. And those leopard geckos interacted with all 5 types, although thermoregulation and feeding appeared more effective than novel enrichments. But however, the overall improvement of using enrichment, environmental enrichment, showed there was an improvement in welfare. And this is really important because quite often we will give animals a very compromised space in captivity. To give an example, this is the kind of environment where wild bearded dragons live. However, this is a very typical sort of vivarium that we provide them. It's going to be very hard to meet those behavioural needs in a space like this. And therefore, another consideration is, can your facility recreate and meet those behavioural needs? And if not for that species, should we be keeping them? Another really important enrichment opportunity is retreat space. Why is retreat space enriching? Well, it can reduce that stress and that frustration, and it allows an animal to have choice and agency over its space. One of the behavioural opportunities that is severely limited for animals in captivity is their ability to move away from one another or from humans. And that lack of significant retreat space is a significant stressor for captive animals. Adding retreat spaces improves indicators of animal welfare, and in many cases it has shown that a reduction of distress provided by the addition of retreat space is directly related to the need to cope with a potential threat. So, for example, animals will show a preference for retreat space that is easily defended. So it may not be the quantity of space provided, but the complexity of the space that affords that animal, affords an animal that determines enclosure impact on its well-being. So again, retreat space or refuges, as shown by the experiments also with pandas and polar bears and goats and sheep in the petting zoo, is really important. And finally, enrichment doesn't stop at the end of the day. Quite often, animals will spend more hours held inside their indoor spaces in a zoo than outdoor. Up to 17, 18 hours can be spent indoors. So night quarters or indoor areas need to be designed in a similar manner to the outside public display areas, and similar or more enrichment, a stronger enrichment program should be considered within that indoor space. I've rushed through this because I'm conscious of the time, but I hope that covered enough for everybody, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Georgina. That was fantastic. And especially for me, it was very enriching, especially to understand that welfare is not surviving, but it's also about thriving now. And your 3 C's, which was on comfort, choice, and control, have beautifully summed up what we need to look for animal welfare. So thank you so much. And we will have some questions for you, but perhaps at the end of the webinar, given the time.
Yeah.
So now, yes, thank you. And I will now request our next speaker, which is Dr. Avanti Mallapur. She is an alumnus of Wildlife Institute of India, where she did her master's. And then she completed her doctoral work from University of Edinburgh for studying the influence of visitor presence on behavior of captive lion-tailed macaques housed in Indian zoos. So Avanti, hopefully many of the zoo community people that you have interacted with during your thesis time are listening today to you. And you firmly believe in zoos' primary role in education. So we look forward to hearing from you as to how you manage your zoo as the curator of Micke Grove Zoo. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sonali. And I thank all the Central Zoo Authority staff for inviting me to make this presentation today. And I'm really excited to share my experience with the audience. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share a variety of enrichment items and strategies that we use at our facility. Before that, I would like to introduce behavior and the link between behavior and enrichment, and why environmental enrichment is a key focus is in the zoo community. Next slide, please. To begin with, we're going to look at a variety of behavioral types. And to define behavior itself, like it was defined by Georgina in her presentation, behavior and behavioral needs are a way that an animal adapts to its native environment. And a key focus in the zoo community today has been to design enclosures and exhibits inside zoos to be more naturalistic and to kind of mimic an animal's natural habitat, because that would help the animal and motivate an animal to display species-specific behavior. But to begin with, we have a variety of types of behavior that are displayed by animals. You have instinctive behavior, which is heritable, and it's a behavior that animals are born with when they hatch or when they're born. In comparison to a behavior that is gained through learning in more evolved species. And both the learning behavior, it tends to be influenced by an animal's ability to adapt to the environment it is living in. And the way this influences the zoo community is that a large portion of a zoo's goals, and I think it's safe to say that most zoos have a common goal of protecting threatened wildlife through conservation, research, and education. And one of the key goals to address these issues is to provide animal residents in zoos with an ability to display natural behaviors, including reproductive behaviors. And many a time it is observed that a large proportion of their behaviors are displaced in captive environments. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define enrichment and what enrichment is exactly. It's a very simple topic, and it basically is an husbandry principle that helps to enhance an animal's need and quality of life in animal exhibits and in animal enclosures. At Micke Grove Zoo, the animal staff have tried to provide the opportunity by providing enclosure complexity, and we're going to go through this over the next few slides. Next slide, please. Environmental enrichment itself has a positive influence on animal behavior. I've had the fortunate opportunity to actually conduct research on a threatened species of primate in India, and I did notice that animal behavior is definitely affected by the enclosures that they live in, by the habitat that they have, by their nutrition, as well as by veterinary care. Next slide, please. To begin with, most animal care staff in our zoo have designed each exhibit, and they receive support from animal management to basically be as naturalistic as possible. And a key fact in that is that the staff need to have a sound understanding of the behavioral biology of each species that is housed in the zoo. As you can see, there's a diversity of behaviors that are displayed by a variety of animals. For example, we have species that are highly arboreal, and in such cases, their exhibits are designed to include small trees and shrubs so that it motivates them to climb. We also have provided with permanent that help them to climb as well. With certain species that are more fossorial, we have an ability to, we have given them an ability to hide out, and we've also provided a variety of substrates that they can dig into. Next slide, please. Please, yeah. To some of the examples that we've given, also along with the exhibits, we provide dens and nest boxes. These are designed and customized depending on the species that they are built for. Certain species that are far more arboreal, like for example, the Waldrop ibises are elevated. And with other species, like some of our reptilian animal residents, such as the snakes, they are more level to the ground. We also have some native nocturnal species, like the ringtail, that have both boxes and dens that are elevated and at the ground level. And this information, again, is shared from and from publications that we have access to. Next slide, please. Substrate is a very important feature in most of animal exhibits. It not only provides an animal an experience that is closer to their natural habitats, but it also has influences their health condition. For example, there are several species that have certain specific types of substrates they need to prevent foot-related health issues like pododermatitis. A variety of substrates are used also in form of enrichment that help animals and motivate animals to display exploratory and foraging behaviors. In some species, we do provide nesting materials that motivate birds to build nests, and in turn motivate them to display reproductive behaviors. Next slide, please. At our facility, nutrition is a fairly important feature. A large proportion of an animal's nutrients are given to them through their diets. Their medications are also supplied to them through their diets. and we make sure that their diets are nutritive and well balanced, which is another influence on their behavior. Next slide, please. And those are the key crux features that we use. But apart from those permanent features that happen on a regular basis, we also try as much as possible to use simple enrichment techniques that help motivate animals to display natural behaviors. And the reason for this is to provide them with an opportunity to display natural species specific behaviors, that we could share this information with our visiting public, but also give the animals an opportunity to display reproductive behaviors and to breed. For many of these species are threatened and are involved in breeding programs. So our enrichments at Micke Grove Zoo are built with a key focus of motivating animals to display exploratory behaviors. And I will be going through different types of enrichment items and enrichment strategies that we use. And each one is focused on a certain behavioral goal. And what we also do along with designing and implementing enrichment is that we closely monitor the enrichment and we evaluate on how successful or unsuccessful it is. And this information is imperative because it gives us a sound understanding on whether a specific enrichment type is successful with a specific species, how long can we use it with that species, and how often do we have to change it out. You have to keep in mind that enrichment items can create a certain behaviors. There are also certain safety issues that need to be taken into account, and animals do get habituated to enrichment items, which is one of the main reasons why we often change enrichment items in each exhibit, and provide animals with new exciting methods to display behavior. The first type of enrichment that we use are environmental, and these are structural features that are temporarily included in each exhibit. These structural features are included at various positions inside the exhibit, and they can be moved around. And most of these are fairly easy to design. At our facility, most of our environmental features have been, environmental items have been designed in-house. For example, we have a huge thicket of bamboo. We use bamboo to create mini ladders, as you can see here. The fire staff have donated large quantities of fire hose to us, and we get them in freely. We have designed hammocks and a whole array of enrichment items through retired fire hoses. Now, these hammocks, interestingly enough, can be used in a variety of exhibits because, as you can see, the most species display resting behaviors, and hammocks could be used by a variety of species, from carnivores to ungulates to even primates. But where do you put up the hammock is finally depends on the animal's behavioral biology. Next slide, please. Another form of enrichment that we use heavily is sensory, and these behaviors are really unique. And we have observed that these behaviors are very rarely displayed by our animal residents. And many of us and animal care staff focus on sensory enrichments, and it's fairly easy to design. As you can see, I haven't worked with tortoises before, but I'm fascinated to see that radiated tortoises enjoy having a back scratch, and it was very easy for us to come up with an enrichment design that could help them. We've got some really old brushes that were placed, and again, the tortoises, most of our animals are given a choice on whether they want to use their enrichment. And when we monitor and evaluate our enrichment items, we have observed that most often they use them right in the start. But we have had several enrichment items that have been unsuccessful, and we have noted the reasons for their failure. In some cases, with some species of birds, our parrots, for example, enjoy showers, and that's a sensory enrichment we use very often, especially on hot summer days. A very creative sensory enrichment that we've used with our carnivores are scents of prey species, such as urine, or used hammocks from an exhibit from a prey species that are placed in a bobcat exhibit, exhibit. Many a time we use a dash of spices that are sprayed on the exhibit. Again, anytime a new enrichment device is in an exhibit, it's scrutinized and it is approved by a committee. We always look at safety concerns because every enrichment item could have some safety concern, and that needs to be addressed prior to a new enrichment being administered to an animal exhibit. Next slide, please. We heavily use manipulative devices because we strongly believe that manipulative devices provide animals with an opportunity to develop their cognitive capacity. And also that's something that we have to closely monitor because we mostly use manipulative enrichment devices with animals that are more evolved, such as primates, carnivores to a given degree, and we also use such devices with our parrots. I've also included a video clip on the left for the FUSA. As you can see, it was a very simple manipulative device. If you could click on the FUSA video, please. As you can see, it was just a tiny piece of log that was attached excuse me, onto a branch, and the FUSA spends the next half an hour trying to maneuver the log. Are you able to click on the FUSA video? I wasn't sure. Yeah, thank you. Most of the enrichment devices we've built, they're cost effective, and we looked around our zoo to find very simple procedures to come up with enrichment devices. This is just a small log, and that has been attached to a limb of a tree. And the fusas are obligate carnivores. They are endemic to Madagascar and very closely related to our canids and felids. And this enrichment device was fairly successful with them, and it motivated them to display exploratory behavior, which had greatly helped us keeping them occupied. Our largest challenge were with carnivores that are highly active, and we needed to find a variety of methods to motivate them to display species-specific behaviors, especially when there was a lack of space and some of them had to be housed indoors. Many a time, animals are housed in the veterinary clinic because they're injured, and even during that time, we have to provide them with a method to display natural behaviors. When spacing is an issue, you can always come up with creative ways of designing simple, effective enrichment devices. Thank you. Next slide, please. Social interactions and housing animals in appropriate social groups is highly significant, and it has been found by the zoo community. And I had the fortunate opportunity also to examine this in my research, that animals that are highly social, if they has a severe detrimental influence on their behavior, and they do display stress. One of our enrichment opportunities is to move animals around in their social groups, to provide them with opportunity to display social interactions such as grooming one another, play behavior in young animals, reproductive behavior, preening, as you can see with our Waldorf ibises. It gets fairly exciting during breeding season when new animals are introduced to one another. We've also tried mixed species exhibits, which have had fascinating, successful results. These are great opportunities as well to motivate animals to display reproductive behaviors and other social interactions, which are fairly important to their behavioral repertoire. Next slide, please. A large proportion of the enrichment strategies and enrichment items that we use at our facility are related to feeding. And that's because what we do find with animals that are housed in zoos is that they are not motivated to display foraging and exploratory behavior, largely because their diets are provided to them. Most of the zoo community and we try to motivate animals to work for their food, and we try various ways of getting them to search for their food. One of the primary ways and very simple way that we do this is by sketching their diet. It's worked successfully with afusas. It's fascinating to observe them after the enrichment has been implemented, especially with species that have a very advanced sense of smell. And you could see them wandering around the exhibit, sniffing in the air, looking for their food. We've used similar strategies with our kids, that's our golden line tamarins and cotton top tamarins. A variety of our birds in our mixed species exhibit have their food scattered as well. With species that are lesser evolved, like our radiated tortoises, we use what we call kebabs, where we have an assortment of animal food items that are placed together. As you can see, we have a kebab here for our radiated tortoises, and they seem to be enjoying it. We also use them for our black parrots very often. Again, the enrichment strategies we use a combination. For example, we use kebabs and we place them at different locations every day. So the animals have to search for their food. With our ducks, like the marble teeth here, we use floating fire hose feed baskets that float on the water. The animals have to find their food, and it could be located anywhere in their pond. With most of us primate species, since they are arboreal, we have food baskets, as you can see here, that are elevated, and their position is changed regularly so that the animals can find them. We also have to closely monitor that they get fed, because sometimes enrichment strategy could have negative results, and you have to make sure that the animals do not to look for their food or give up looking for their diet. Their diets and the use of their diets is a very imperative feature. Next slide, please. A large proportion of the enrichment devices that we use for our animals that have greater cognitive capacities are puzzles. And the zoo community have been using puzzle feeders, which are complex, where we use puzzles to feed animals, largely because we believe that it motivates animals to use and to develop their cognitive capacity. It gets them to strategize and come up with strategies to find food. And many of our food puzzles have been designed in-house, and they're fairly simple. And many of the ones that we use, and we use them with a variety of species, have been fairly successful. And I have a few here which are very simple to design. The one on the bottom left is a puzzle feeder that was built by fire hoses. The design is very simple, and I could share that with you later. And what we do with that, and it's used in multiple animal exhibits, from exhibits housing felids to primates to even our parrots, is that we crush their food and we include it inside the enrichment device. And we prop up the enrichment device at various locations inside the exhibit. The animals are aware, because they can smell their food, that their food has been given to them, and they have to search for it. And the searchability and exploratory behavior that it motivates is far higher than when the animals get their food in a plate. The middle image is bamboo pieces with holes in them. And these are, again, puzzle feeders where we fill the bamboo, which is hollow, with hay, and we place, especially for our insectivores, we place feeder insects in the hay. The insects that we use to feed our animals are crickets, mealworms, flies, and so forth. They have been highly successful because many of these insects are desirable by many of our species, especially by our hawk-headed parrots and our golden lion tamarins, as you can see them on the left. And largely, when these feeder puzzles are administered, you can see them observing and trying to get the insects out. It involves a lot of patience, a lot of strategies to actually use these devices, and many a time our golden lion tamarins have been fairly successful in acquiring the insects from within. We have to keep in mind that these puzzle feeders are administered to animals who can strategize. We have noticed that these puzzle feeders were fairly unsuccessful with lemurs, while the golden tamarins and spider monkeys found it easy to find the insects within, the lemurs could not. We've also used puzzle feeders with our hawk-headed parrots. In these situations, we design a variety of objects using paper mache. As you can see, you have a hollow ball that was made out of paper mache, and within this ball, we place some of their food items like walnuts and treats. And as you can see, that's where very curious this new enrichment device. With the golden lion tamarins on the top, we use a various different devices, food puzzles, where we use power tools to make holes in devices and add the enrichment components to the device. Next slide, please. Animal training is an important feature at our facility. This again is very basic animal training. Animal training is a fantastic enrichment for our animal residents. Not only does it help them develop their cognitive capacities, it also helps them build a positive bond with their animal care staff. And as you can see here, in animals, positive reinforcement primarily for their health examinations. We conduct preventive health examinations of all our animal residents on an annual basis. And to actually get them across to our veterinary team, sometimes it can be negative when you're trying to capture them. And these capture techniques could have a stressful impact on our animal residents. To prevent that from happening, many a time we have trained animals to get into their carriers. As you can see, a female southern poodoo is being trained to use her carrier. The carrier is placed in an exhibit. It's almost like a little den, and we use positive reinforcement techniques to get her to be comfortable in there. This makes it far easier for the animal care staff when she has to be taken in for a veterinary exam. Similarly, we use target training with multiple species, as you can see here with our provost squirrels and our lemurs, where they are trained to reach a certain target. And once they are trained to reach a target, then that is used as a control, and then we can train them to obtain certain goals. For example, similar to the golden line tamarin on the top, we weigh animals regularly. Animal weights help us immensely. It answers several questions for us. If an animal is unwell, their weight drops, and we understand that there's a problem because their weights have dropped. Many a time, if animals are pregnant, their weight increases, and any fluctuation in weight gives us a sound understanding that the animal's situation has changed. A large proportion of our animals have been trained to use their weighing scales through positive reinforcement techniques. And in most cases, we use food items to train them. And these food items are carefully chosen and are always a part of their diet. We make sure that they don't get additional items in their diet. All the animals' diets, as well as enrichment items, including food items, are discussed in a committee and our veterinary staff as well. And once they're approved, and that's the only time they are used. Next question. Next slide, please. Thank you. I didn't bring them up before, but a critical aspect in the zoo is enrichment safety. And enrichment have had hazardous results in multiple facilities, including our own. Every enrichment device that's used as by our facility is scrutinized, is checked by a committee and the veterinary team, and only when it's approved it is used. And it also needs to be approved for specific species. Several enrichment items that are used with certain species are not used with others. Also there are personality differences. For example, we have a variety of enrichment items that we use with our snow leopard and our bobcat that we do not use with the fusas, because the fusas tend to chew on many items, and we are unable to use anything heavy duty, any heavy duty plastic items with fusas. Similarly, we try as much as possible not to include any toxic plants that could be fed upon or chewed upon by our primates. A large proportion of our devices that are available today have batteries or electric components to it. We try that we train all our staff not to use any of these items in the zoo as enrichment. Also have to be very careful on what kind of enrichment devices that we prepare and construct, because animals can get stuck in holes, they can get entangled in hammocks. If they are able to chew the enrichment item, they can break off a part and swallow it and asphyxiate. They can get their legs caught in enrichment items. They can also eat some food item that might have a disease in it. We have to make sure that all food items that are administered in food enrichment are disease-free. Zoos also have challenges where open outdoor exhibits where enrichment was administered, animals were able to carry these heavy-duty enrichment and throw them towards the visiting public, and it has been injurious to the visiting public. And that's something that we have to be careful of as well. Apart from that, we have closely monitored and evaluated every enrichment item that we have used in the zoo for a variety of reasons, because we need to check if the enrichment item is successful, how long it takes for an animal to habituate to the item, whether it's species specific. If you use an item with the bobcat, could we use it with the fusas and with snow leopards? All information about enrichment items are studied in detail and documented, and that information is shared with all the zoo staff. And in some situations, we share them with the zoo community as well. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avanti. That was fantastic, and especially to give us a sneak peek, behind the scenes, especially in your Micke Grove Zoo. And I think and personally for me, the last slide where you give us the enrichment safety details was also an eye opener, and it's great, and to see that how closely you monitor each and everything, and making enrichment especially as a science in which we need to look deeper into. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we are a little bit in terms of behind schedule. But having said that, I might as well want to take a few questions, and because we've got some great reviews coming up on the YouTube channel chat box. So I'll open up, and I'll have 3 questions for each of our key speakers today. And I'll start with Ms. Georgina today. Georgina, the question which has come up in the chat box of the YouTube channel and I think I'll drive it to you, is that should night shelter enrichment be similar to enclosure enrichment, considering they are small areas? So I am assuming it's to do with when you have very limited space, and what do you do with it?
It's a good question, and one that I get asked a lot, because people feel quite overwhelmed when enrichment is described, and they think they need to have a huge amount of space for these animals. Space is, of course, very important, but even more important is what you do within that space and the environment that you provide within that space. So as I said in my presentation, animals can quite often spend about 16 hours of their day shut inside, if they are shut inside a part of management practice, say from 4:30 in the afternoon to 8:30 in the morning. And those animals might be more active during the nighttime. They might be a nocturnal species. And therefore, and even if they're not, you should still be providing an enrichment program for those individuals in that space. So whether it's an indoor space or it's a small space, what you need to do is consider what the animal's behavioural needs are. Are they arboreal? Are they terrestrial? Are they social? What are their behavioural needs? And when are they most active? When do they carry out these behaviours? What motivates them to carry out these behaviours? Remembering that not all behaviours are equal, and we want to prioritise encouraging those behaviours that are positive and rewarding. You would then consider that space and think about how can you use it both vertically and horizontally. Remember, using all that area of space dependent on the species needs and the species priorities. You create a nice rotational enrichment plan that is diverse, that's species appropriate, but key to all of this is ensuring that you evaluate any enrichment that you do. And again, just reiterating what Avanti said, is that safety is paramount. Any new enrichment practice that you put into an enclosure should be consistently evaluated and monitored, because every animal will react differently to that enrichment. For small spaces, you can add substrates, you can do food hiding, you can create perches, you can create hammocks. Olfactory spraying, spice use is very useful in terms of simple enrichment tools that can be used in any size enclosure. And very quickly, I just want to share a video, if that's okay, which is a video of a very small gibbon enclosure in a rescue space. And as you'll see, what they did was ensure that they could meet that species' behavioural and physical needs. Gibbons have evolved to live high up in the canopies, in trees that move around in the wind. They want flexibility. So if you'll notice, and I'll just play that again, all those tree stumps here are attached by hoses so that they are movable. So you can still provide that vacating space for the individuals, even in a small area. And very quickly, another small video. This was something that we designed for some macaques in a enclosure in Vietnam, which was fairly barren, as you can see. But we provided a simple foraging box for these individuals, so they actually start hunting and looking for their food instead of it just being thrown on the floor. It was a small space, but what it does is it encouraged some social cohesion, although a little fighting as well, which you'll see in a minute, but allowed the animals to look for their food. So even in a very basic enclosure, it gave them something to do, and it was species appropriate and encouraged those rewarding behaviours. So I think what I'm saying is that don't worry too much if you have limited space. Just think about what you can do within that space, which is species appropriate and encourages those rewarding positive behaviours, but is also safe for the animals and also for the people and the keepers who are using that enrichment. I hope that answers some of the question.
Yes, thank you very much, Georgina. That was absolutely brilliant, and again, amazing videos and the way you say it. And we always feel that it is, oh yes, this is what we could have done, and amazing in terms of what you have shown. So thank you so much again. To save on time, I will now ask Dr. Avanti a question that has come from the registration forms. And this is for you, is that can enrichment be used as a curative tool for captive animals, especially those who have already exhibiting extreme stereotypic behavior? So what's your view on it?
Well, in some situations, I had researched using some of these tools with lion-tailed macaques when I worked with Indian zoos, where a large proportion of them were brought in. They were taken in by because of pet trade, confiscated by the forest staff and brought into zoos. But by then, because they had been isolated and by the private parties that housed them, they had developed severe behavioral problems such as pacing behavior, floating limb, and stereotypic pacing. A large proportion of behaviors were self-aggression, which was a huge challenge. Many a time, stereotypic behaviors, once they have started being displayed, it is more challenging to reduce the proportion of behavior displayed in comparison to preventing the behavior from developing in the first place. But once animals have started displaying these behaviors, I did notice, depending on which behavior you're targeting, and I always encouraged targeting specific abnormal behaviors because each behavior can be addressed in a different manner. And in this research study, I was targeting self-aggression because I did observe several adult male lion-tailed macaques displaying self-aggressive and self-injurious behavior, because the aggressive behavior towards their own selves was so heavy and so frequent that they were injuring their limbs, they were injuring their shoulders, and so forth. This was addressed by a simple technique where we provided them with certain forms of enrichment, and it was observed that they had started displaying the aggressive behaviors towards enrichment, and a greater proportion of the aggressive behaviors were displayed towards enrichment and lesser towards themselves. So I think self-aggression was addressed to a very limited degree, but what was heartwarming to see was that we could address it. And it's similar to stereotypic pacing as well. If we understand the behavioral biology of the species displaying the behavior and focus on certain species, the animal hasn't been able to motivate, the environment of the animal doesn't motivate the animal to perform it, I think those behaviors can be addressed. I hope I answered the question.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving that example as well from your thesis work. So that's again, I think, has made a very important point of how enrichment becomes critical. A final question to Dr. S.P. Yadav. So it is important, and I think everybody feels that way, especially in India, that animal keepers, zoo biologists are fairly well paid and well trained, especially when you see their jobs across Europe and America. Is there any scope to make the job of animal keeper as attractive to a qualified young graduate in India as when we compare it to the zoos across the world?
Sonali, this question is very, very important and very right in saying that we need good, qualified, highly educated zookeepers in our country. I think in India, there are a number of new zoos are coming under the PPP mode with private partners. There are a number of zoos which are owned by the private industrial houses and public sector undertaking. And those zoos, though, which are earning good revenue, I think they should start employing the highly educated and qualified zookeepers in the same lines as it's happening in the Western countries. And I think there is a scope of qualified zookeepers in our country, but it will pick up gradually, not because most of zoos are owned by the governments, state governments, and there it will be difficult, but I think there is a scope in the zoos which are owned by the private industrial houses and public sector undertaking. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. And I think this is one of the first steps in terms of thinking aloud and also being able to bring in new ideas. And for this, I thank all my speakers, expert speakers who have joined us today. Thank you. We have kept you away from your lunchtime, but once again, thank you for joining us from across the continents. I take this opportunity to thank my backroom team back in Caesar Day and also in Mysuru Zoo for the excellent backup that they have provided. And until we meet next time, thank you very much and bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, CZT team, for organizing this. Thank you so much, Georgina and Avanti. See you. Goodbye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.